Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster, and good evening, fellow Toastmasters. Today, I want to talk to you all about the importance of critical thinking. Now, critical thinking is probably a term that you've heard used before, but do you know what's required to be a good critical thinker? A broad definition of critical thinking would be to analyze arguments, information, and data to come to an informed conclusion. Although this is not wrong, there's much more to it than this. The goal of my speech today is to inform you of the complexities of critical thinking and to help you all to become better critical thinkers. So, to be a critical thinker, we want to rationally evaluate arguments. And why is it important to rationally evaluate? There are many reasons. One is that we don't want to believe everything that we come across. I'm sure you know not to believe everything you hear, but we tend to do this more than we realize. We also want to understand our own personal values and beliefs. It's very important to be able to explain why you hold your values. If you are unable to provide reasoning for your values, then you're just holding the values of others rather than your own. We also want to protect ourselves from being manipulated. People often use fallacies and rhetoric in order to make their arguments sound more persuasive and to maybe even manipulate people into believing their argument. With that being said, let's look at some ways people make their arguments more persuasive, starting with fallacies. And we'll go over 3 popular fallacies. The first being ad hominem fallacy. So ad hominem means to attack the person rather than their argument. An example of the ad hominem fallacy would be, don't listen to that guy, he's a fool, which is ad hominem. And next is appeal to emotion. There are many forms of this, such as appeal to pity, appeal to anger, appeal to flattery, and more. An example would be, don't fire me or my wife will kick me out. Your wife kicking you out is not a reason for why you should or should not be fired. Then there's the post hoc fallacy, which means that if event 2 happens after event 1, this does not mean that event 1 caused event 2. There could be other reasons, such as another factor causing it, a third event causing both of these events, or maybe it's reverse causation. People also use language to detract from what may be a weak argument. Things are often taken out of context to make them sound better or worse than they would in the actual context. Euphemisms and diaphysms are also used to make something sound better or worse than it may actually be. An example of a euphemism would be genuine imitation leather. An example of a diaphysm would be cheap fake leather. If an argument uses a lot of datas, studies, or statistics, you want to be especially wary because there are many ways to manipulate these things. Averages can be distortive because you can't gauge the outliers. You want to know the sample size because a small sample size means the results are less likely to be replicated. If a survey is being cited, you want to know the questions being asked, the phrasings, the order, and the amount of choices, because these all affect someone's answers. You want to be aware of misleading aggregation, such as lumping violent crimes with less violent ones, misleading comparisons, misleading graphs, and much more. There are whole books on the subject, and it's very important to be aware of. You also want to be aware of your own personal biases, such as the halo bias, which means we attribute multiple positive characteristics to someone or something based on a few, maybe 1 or 2 positive characteristics that we already know of, regardless of whether or not they may actually have these other characteristics. And there's also the overconfidence. There's also the confirmation bias, which means we are more willing to accept arguments that confirm our beliefs and opinions, and more willing to refute arguments that disconfirm them. So, if you see an argument that you don't agree with, is it because the reasoning is faulty, or is it because you don't like what's being said? So, we can be better critical thinkers by analyzing arguments and being aware of our own biases. We should be open to different opinions it's it, listen to a variety of opinions before forming our own opinions. And it's okay not to have an opinion on a topic. It's better to have no opinion than an ill-formed one. And we should be willing to change our opinion if need be. Also, and don't give in to mob mentality. So I want to leave you all with one quick way to evaluate arguments called the RATS criteria. RAT stands for relevancy, authority, accuracy, typicality, and sufficiency. So, relevancy means is the evidence being offered relevant to the argument being made, or are they just using faulty reasoning? Authority and accuracy means who's giving the evidence, are they credible, and are they known to give accurate evidence? Typicality means is the evidence typical, or is it normal, or are they just using extreme cases? And then there's sufficiency, which means is the amount of evidence offered enough for us to be able to accept the argument. Using these tips, being aware of weak arguments, and our own personal biases will help us all to become better critical thinkers. Thank you for listening.